Hey guys, Stef here. Customization versus creation. This is an email that was put to me. Essentially, somebody's asking, is software development about creating from scratch or customizing pre-existing code bases and solutions? Let's jump into it. All right, let me lead with the conclusion. At the end of the day, modern day developers, modern day programmers are always using other people's work. When you're using Windows, you're using other people's work. When you're using Mac OS, you're using Linux, you're using other people's work. You're basing it on that. If you're using a programming language like a Python, a JavaScript, a Java, a C#, a PHP, whatever, think of it, whatever language out there, you are actually leveraging other people's code. If you're using an SQL database, a NoSQL database, you're using MongoDB or using MySQL, you're using Oracle, you're using other people's code. So this notion that you should be writing from scratch is a grand illusion. Because when people talk about this, they think about things like a content management system, let's say a WordPress, let's say a Drupal. Or maybe you're thinking of building your own web framework from scratch. So what's a web framework? Well, PHP, there's Laravel. In Python, there's Django or Flask. In Java, there's Spring. Node.js has Express.js. And there are many others. Frameworks are just libraries of code put together and structured in a particular way to provide that foundation, that scaffolding, that rough structure, if you will, for your typical app that you're going to build. If you're using iOS and you're using the iOS libraries, you're using other people's code. So try not to get caught up in this idea, this illusion that programmers should be writing things from scratch. Because these days, unless you're writing in machine code, unless you're writing maybe assembler, you're using other people's code. You're leveraging other people's code. So it brings me to my first rule of software development. I learned this a long time ago, about 20 years ago, from one of my mentor coder friends. And he said, the top 3 rules of programming are reuse, reuse, reuse. In real estate, the top 3 rules are location, 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 meaning location is super important in real estate. And in software development, it's reuse, reuse, reuse. Reuse other people's code. So let me give you a quick 2-second insight into how I approach a project. So I go see a client, they have a project for me to build, or I see an opportunity in the market, I decide I'm going to build my own product. So the first thing I do is I look out and I see what other projects are out there, what other programmers have created similar products that I'm thinking of building. That's the first thing you do. Spend a couple of days looking into that. See if you can find something that's already been built. Number 1 reason is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Number 2 reason, you always want to know what is out there before you start writing any code, just for business sake, right? When you're starting a business, you don't go out there blind without checking what the market has out there. They call it the market research. You got to know what's going on before you get into it. That's the first thing I do when I'm thinking about building a new project. I see what is out there. And the next thing I do is when I'm architecting the project, I determine what language and what framework is best suited for that particular project. Some projects, Java might be better, some projects Python might be better, some projects PHP might be better, and most projects Ruby will not be any good. That was a joke. I'm loving trolling the Ruby people. Ruby's a great language. It's still used quite a bit, but it's one of those things that goes back to 2006 where I have fun with the Ruby guys. Now, Ruby's a great language. But anyway, I want to use it today. No, Ruby's a great language. You get the idea. So you got to choose the technology stack that makes sense given your project. How do you determine that? Well, this is where experience comes in. This is where having a good understanding of the fundamentals of programming and development really play a big role in whether or not you're going to be able to discern this. That's why when people come to me and say, should I learn Vue? Should I learn React? Or should I learn Angular? Or should I learn PHP? Should I learn Python? Should I learn Ruby? Never learn Ruby. Just kidding. Should I learn Java? Should I learn Ruby? Et cetera, et cetera. I tell them it depends on the project and depends on the program you want to do. Before you can make those judgments, you have to first learn your fundamentals. That's why I keep telling people, learn the fundamentals first. That's why I'm one of the only courses out there that really hammers in not just fundamental coding, but fundamental programming concepts and infrastructure. I train you about the infrastructure in which all your code will reside. And once you have that knowledge, then all of a sudden you'll be able to make intelligent decisions, much more intelligent decisions about what language to build your apps in, or what frameworks you want to build your apps in, or what type of programming you want to do in the first place, because programming is not all the same. If you are writing web apps, it's a very different beast from writing AI or machine learning code, which is a very different beast from writing code to control IoT devices, Internet of Things devices. Totally different types of coding. And literally different personality types will gravitate to one type of coding versus the other. So the next question people come up and say, well, how much money? Which one will make the most money in? Any type of coding, just about. If you're competent, you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of money. Now, people will go to Indeed.com and see, oh, look, data scientist programmers who do data modeling or something. They make a lot more money. Now, that could be, they make an extra 20 grand a year, average 10 grand a year, than, let's say, a web stack coder. Well, that really depends. It depends on your experience, depends on what type of web you're doing. It also depends on the fact that with the data sciences, I don't think you can learn Python and learn how to crunch data. I don't think you're going to get a job as a data scientist. You got to have that background as well, years of education as well in that other field. So you have to look at all these different things. So back to the core of this particular video. Yes, you're going to use other people's products, and sometimes that might be a content management system. Heaven forbid, you might have to use WordPress. Guess what? There's a huge amount of work in WordPress, a huge amount of work. Since designers are afraid of WordPress, and since developers don't want to touch WordPress, the people who actually work with WordPress and understand the WordPress ecosystem, understand how WordPress works, understand how to install them, configure them, they know what plugins are safe, which are not, how to customize themes. You're going to print money as a WordPress professional. There's no question about it. So many small businesses are run on WordPress. Is it the best thing since sliced bread? No, it's not. It has its problems. Trust me, I've ranted about WordPress. But nonetheless, it is a market leader in the content management space, and it's a market leader with small businesses, which brings me to I think this will be my last point for this particular video. When you're evaluating any technology, you can't just look at it from the point of view of a nerd or of a geek. You know, some people say, what do you think of Rust? What do you think of Go? What do you think of R? What do you think of Java? What do you think of Python? What do you think, and they're very concerned about the core language itself. And that has some relevance, but most modern languages are neck and neck in terms of their abilities. What I mean by that is that, yes, Java may be better in certain areas than Python and vice versa, or C# may be better than JavaScript in other areas, and so on and so forth. Yes, each language will have the pros and cons, and given a certain circumstance, a particular language may shine over other languages because of whatever reasons. Could be the libraries they have, like Python. Python's power, as an example, is that it's got a huge set of libraries that you can leverage to be very productive very quickly with Python. So I remember I mentioned this in previous vlogs where AI developers would write their core engine in C++, and they write, and that'd be like 5% of the code base, and they write everything else in Python. Even though C++ code will literally run circles around Python in terms of speed at runtime. But they said that Python is so much quicker to write code with that Python code writing runs circles around C++. So instead of taking a year to develop something in C++, you can do it in 30 days in Python. These are just rough numbers, but you get the idea about how productive the Python language is in terms of when you're writing your code, although it runs so much slower than C++ at runtime. But in many applications, you don't need that C++ hyper speed for a lot of work. You just don't need it. But what you do need is that ability to create and deploy apps very quickly. So that's why you have all these different programming languages, because each one has its pros and its cons. So when you're evaluating language, there's no one language that's better than the others. It depends on the project, depends on the type of work that you're doing. And you also have to look at business considerations. So you could say, yes, Ruby is a more elegant language in many respects versus PHP. There's no question. But there's just so much PHP out there. Now, for years and years, I've heard people say PHP is going to die and blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, PHP is in many, many rankings I've done in previous videos. In 2018, many, many rankings. Poor old PHP still in the top 5, top 7 languages, where Ruby is off the top 10, sometimes far lower, even though in 2007, all the Ruby people were going, it's going to take over. And yet, they were so enamored of the language and its elegance, Ruby's language. And they looked at like old PHP. New PHP is much, much, much better. PHP 7 is much better than PHP 5. Nonetheless, Ruby is a more elegant language in many respects, but it had some other major deficits, and it just never was able to penetrate and hit that tipping point that PHP has hit a long time ago. And so Ruby is fading slowly, and PHP is holding strong in terms of popularity. Again, this is not saying that PHP is technically superior, not at all. In certain areas, Ruby is far superior. Of course, in other areas, PHP is far superior to Ruby. PHP runs circles around Ruby at runtime, as an example. Anyhow, but the point I want to get to is that you have to consider the market forces and the business considerations when choosing a language, not just the technical efficiencies of a language. So you got to choose what it is you like, the type of coding you want to do. Number 2, you got to choose the technical, you got to look at what type of work you want to do and what language exceeds in that area. And number 3, you got to look at market forces. You may think that, I don't know, pick a language. You may think a Flash action script is the best for animation on the web, but nobody uses it anymore. It's dead. It's over. It's gone. It's finished. And if you're a Flash action scripter, I guarantee you'd be pretty mad, and you're probably giving me a thumbs down right now on this video, But again, you gotta, what I try to do on my YouTube channel is bring the business end, the real world considerations of software development that other channels nobody talks about. Well, I talk about this because I'm leaning on my 20 years plus experience in this game. So you got to be language agnostic, and you got to be framework agnostic, which means, that's my way of saying you don't care. They're just tools, right? You don't care. You choose whatever tools is good for that particular job. If the job requires a hammer, you don't keep trying to use a screwdriver. Use the hammer. Same thing with programming languages, same thing with frameworks. And again, back to the original question, which I totally forget. Let me just look. Customization versus creation. Yeah, you're going to be leveraging other people's code, other people's frameworks, whether it be a CMS, whether it be an MVC framework like Java Spring or PHP Laravel or Python Flask, or other people's libraries. You're crazy to write from scratch. I have done it in the past, back in the 90s. Don't do it unless you absolutely have to, because it makes your projects far more time consuming to complete. And what you find is that a lot of these frameworks, because you have multiple contributors, because they've been vetted over time, they're probably going to be far better built than anything you could build from scratch, with some exceptions. But generally speaking, as a productive coder who wants to make money, of course, you're going to be using other people's code. Yes, so customization versus creation. By the way, the act of customizing other people's code bases and then adding to them is creation in of itself. And as I said, if you remember my earlier point, if you're using a database server, you're using a programming language, you're using an operating system, you are already using other people's code. All right, I hope that helps. And if I look tired, I am tired. I biked 20 miles yesterday, something like that, up hills and down hills and up hills. And it took a lot out of me. All right, that's it for now. Ciao.